Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Christian Sweeney, and I'm the Deputy Organizing Director at the AFLCIO. I also serve as the co-chair of the LIFT Fund, which stands for the Labor Innovations for the 21st Century Fund. It's a joint fund of the AFLCIO and a number of foundations which supports worker center union partnerships. It's been around for about 8 years now. I'm here today with my friend and sometimes collaborator, but always a good partner from the Workers Lab, Eddy Morales. And we're interested in having a conversation today about how workers are organizing to have a say in their workplaces, and how workers are organizing to address the critical problems that we face in our society: income inequality, racial inequity, etc. So let me head over to Eddy to introduce himself, and then we can get the ball rolling.
Thanks so much for that introduction, and it's really a pleasure to be on this Horizons, meet and greet, candid conversation with you. Like you said, my name is Eddy Morales. I'm the Director of External Affairs at the Workers Lab. And at the Workers Lab, we envision a society where all workers are safe, healthy, secure, and free. And we know that right now workers can't say that they are. Many workers can't say they are. And that's partly because many of our systems and structures that make and keep workers safe, healthy, secure, and free were created with all workers in mind. And so in order to achieve our mission, we really believe in investing in new ideas for workers. And so that's why our purpose is to give new ideas for workers a chance to succeed and flourish. And we kind of do that through three ways. We invest in new ideas that innovators or workers are working on through our innovation fund. And then we invest in ideas that no one else is working on through our program called our Design Sprint. We then take the time to learn from these investments and try to take these new ideas either to fix, update, introduce, or transform something that may help keep workers safe, healthy, secure, and free. And then the third is that we really try to inform. We take those learnings, we try to make sense of them, and then use them to inform leaders who are making decisions that impact workers and work. And so I'm really excited to have this conversation with you today.
Super. That's Eddy. Thanks so much. That's a really nice summary of the work of the Workers Lab. I don't have as neatly prepared a summary of what we do at the Federation, but I probably should say a little bit about what the AFL-CIO is and what the LIFT Fund does as well. LIFT Fund is similar to Workers Lab, although not exactly 100% the same. So I appreciate your nice, clean buckets. That's really helpful. So the AFL-CIO, as many people know, is the labor federation of the United States. Most, not quite all, but most of the unions in the United States are members of the AFL-CIO. It's the American Federation of Labor and the Congress of Industrial Organizations. The AFL-CIO is a diverse federation. We have members that do every job imaginable in the United States, from farm workers picking produce to the most high-tech folks building the technologies of the future. Construction workers, nurses, teachers, manufacturing workers, sort of every possible kind of workplace. The thing that unites most of the people who are members of AFL-CIO unions is they mostly engage in collective bargaining. Not all, but most do. And collective bargaining, of course, is the system where workers get to sit down at a table, with their employers to negotiate a contract that covers wages, benefits, working conditions. And that's a model that's adapted and changed over time. It's the unions. Some of our unions, date to the 1880s, and some are relatively new. And the model of collective bargaining has changed over time, from the construction trades where they organized by getting all of the skilled workers into to set a standard of their rates and wages, to more contemporary situations where we see forms of organization, that are sometimes using advocacy and other means to win improvements in their wages and benefits and working conditions, or well, anyway, we can talk more about those forms as we go forward. But to say that our movement is diverse and historic, but we also very much believe that if you look at the course of American history, that the major theme of labor history is that of adaptation and change. And as the form of work has changed in the United States, the way that workers have come together to express their power and to win a fair wage and fairness of all kinds has changed as well. So a couple of years ago, we started a thing called the Lift Fund, which I mentioned before. And the Lift Fund is designed to encourage experimentation with worker centers and unions for organizing and other purposes. And so we make grants on a 2-year cycle to do that. And and again, across sectors, everything from domestic workers to farm workers to construction workers, in lots of different sectors. So I guess, I don't know, Eddie, we have some questions that we're going to run through, and so maybe we should dig into those questions. They're good, meaty questions. Do you want to maybe take a crack at starting the one about why does job quality matter, and to go with that, or your pleasure on what you'd like
Well,
to.
Christian, I'm really glad that you took the time to explain the federation and sort of the role of unions in some way. And a lot of times I think people tend to pin innovation in the work that workers are in new forms of organizing, and the traditional and other things that historically have been. And actually, I do think they go hand in hand and very complementary.
Absolutely.
And so it's interesting. We are in the middle of our innovation fund, and what we do with that is we put out a call for broad ideas on how to build worker power. Again, and we believe worker power is both the prerequisite and the result of workers being safe, healthy, secure, and free. And so embedded in that is workers having a voice, control, and mobility at work. And right now what we're seeing from a lot, we get like thousands of applications, and what we're seeing in terms of what workers and people who are in the worker space are coming back with us are quality jobs for them. And this is in the particular order that we're seeing. These are like wages, super important for people, career pathways, having voice, benefits, and scheduling were like sort of top tier from these applications that we're getting. Again, these are we get stuff from 48 different states, 7 different countries, and these are the trends we're seeing. The other thing is a path to business ownership and equity and in governance, right? So workers are definitely not just wanting to get stuck in a particular job. Obviously, because of the pandemic, safe and sanitary work environments that are also free from abuse have really surfaced in our learnings in this last couple of years. Technical skills training and worker education, community and personal development and healing has kind of sort of entered the conversation, right? We know we're dealing with healing from this pandemic, but just generational trauma as well. And housing and financial stability and wealth asset building, right? So it's really comprehensive, it's well rounded out. We do believe quality jobs address many of those aspects that help keep workers safe, healthy, secure, and free. But I would say that quality jobs as the beginning of the conversation, and we should really be talking about quality careers and sort of high road career pathways, right? And those that are keeping up with a lot of the major investments that we're seeing, whether it's green infrastructure or infrastructure projects as well. And so, yeah, I'm curious to hear from you, what your take on this and sort of like how unions are building and empowering workers, right, today and historically. So.
Yeah. That's a great list, Eddie, and I think we see the same things. And it's interesting to think about the people who or soliciting grants from the Workers Lab and that sort of comprehensive view, because it reminds me of some of the sort of most iconic unions have done some of those while they were maybe engaging with their employers over collective bargaining about a fairly traditional set of things, wages, pensions, healthcare. So like if you think about the textile worker unions in New York City, they built, they engaged in collective bargaining to win, some a middle class lifestyle for some of those workers, but then they also built housing and they started banks and they created this whole world of worker empowerment. Everything from summer camps to housing in New York City that were and elsewhere too, but New York. I'm a native New Yorker, so think about those examples first. That's how that's happened before in our history too. So yeah, I see many of the same things that you mentioned, Eddy. That we've gotten. I would say that I feel like the labor movement and unions in general are, getting more attention and in people's minds more than they have been in the 20 years that I've been an organizer. When I got my start in the labor movement in the late 90s, I helped organize my own workplace, and it was, people thought that was kind of cool, like, oh, that's cool, you're doing a union thing, but it wasn't the way it is today, where we see people organizing in high-profile campaigns all over the place, and we see you were really at like a 25-year high watermark in terms of public opinion about unions and workers' rights. And I think that that's because, for such a long period of time, we've had, blocked roadways for people to win collective bargaining, or to, win some of the things you talked about in so many parts of the economy. While wages and benefits are improving for the highest level professional workers, and sort of the top 5% of of Americans are doing pretty well. For the vast the vast bulk of our society, really, we've seen this. People have seen the slide, I'm sure, seen the graph. Productivity is a line that goes up like this, and wages are a line that goes like that. And for us, the question of union density, right? The percentage of workers that are represented, by unions in the whole economy is a downward trend, from the late 70s. Again, if you looked at that, you would see, unionization rates go down, and inequality goes straight up. And if we, for an important period in our history, that wasn't the case, right? And we had a period of time where increased productivity and the sort of overall benefit of the economy was being shared with the vast bulk of Americans, not all Americans, and like it's write off racism and other forms of oppression that kept those benefits from certain people, at a in a discriminatory and horrible way. But in the big bulk of it, we had a period where, like, hey, we're sharing the goods that we're producing, and that bet's off, right? So, and we've had that bet has been off for 40 years, and so, like, it can't keep on going this way. There's an almost inevitability that people will figure out ways to make their demands known. I think I appreciate what the Workers Lab does so much, because I think that when we look at the sort of history of, I apologize for all these history references, it's my academic training, but when we look at the history of the US labor movement, we see growth in spurts. And all those spurts in the 1880s and 1930s, in the 30s and 40s, and also in the 60s, each of those spurts is combined with a period where workers figure out a new way to organize. So in the 1880s, it's craft unionism, getting all the people who share a certain skill together to negotiate to get a better return on your investment. In the industrial period in the 30s and 40s, it's industrial unionism. You think about the UAW and the steelworkers, who really like made the deal that we think of as what you get for your job, right? Healthcare, pension, a safe workplace. And in the 60s, it's public sector unionism, right? People figured, like, gosh, maybe teachers shouldn't get paid so badly, and maybe they should have a say over these things, or the healthcare workers, or other, public sector unionism. But we haven't seen, although there's been lots of attempts and tries at new forms of organization, the economy has changed, but we haven't fully caught up. In terms of, and I'd also say like those old parts of the labor movement, they don't totally go away, right? They keep up, they adapt, they change. What the IBW did in 1880 is not what the IBW does today. They're doing all kinds of interesting things in high tech and solar and and wind, other construction trades too. Um, but there's got to be some new forms. So we've got to figure out some new ways to organize for people to organize themselves, to change to how the economy is changing as well. And so I think that the things you mentioned, career path, wages, scheduling, some share of the pie, those things are all pretty universal over time. What we have to figure out though is the sort of how do we enable workers to do that? I would say two more things, then I don't want to filibuster here. One is I think it probably has to be some form of new organizations, right? Some form of, hey, we used to, everyone walks through the same factory gate. It's this work has changed in some ways, although we still have people who do walk through the same factory gate. The But there's also got to be a question, as a society, we need to answer some basic questions about what kind of rights we're going to afford people in the United States. We're really excited about this labor law reform bill, the PRO Act, the Protecting the Right to Organize Act. For 40 years, our labor law has been an abysmal failure. We see it in when workers try and organize, whether it's into new organizations or traditional unions. There's massive employer opposition. We see workers get fired in about 20% of organizing campaigns illegally. Workers are threatened with, we'll shut down the operations, almost, more than half the time. It's really a brutal process that needn't be so brutal. It's kind of nutty that it is the way it is. And we, as a society, as the same way we're having a reckoning about lots of inequality issues, we've got a major policy question that's put a stumbling block up in front of people when they try and organize. And it's not just labor law reform. We can look at immigration. We can look at a number of issues that would say, we've got policy questions about how we run our government and run our society and run our businesses that stop people from getting together to deal with these questions.
Well, Krishna, I think that the role organized labor has played is so powerful, and you're exactly right in terms of the trends as we see, income inequalities and the really organized attacks on workers' rights to organize and collectively bargain. And so, as we're thinking about innovation, obviously, we think about the pathway to getting workers to have voice in collective bargaining power. And we really do see ourselves as um, sort of R&D, if you will, right, for labor. And so we are coming into contact with workers who are trying and testing different models, whether it's cooperatives, right?
Yeah.
During the pandemic, we did a call in the fall where we had over 600 applications asking people, like, what is the right recovery, right, from your perspective? And we had ideas and I'll just share one that I'm super excited about is a forestry program started by a young man, African American man named Brandon, who was incarcerated in California. A lot of the forest fires are fought by inmates. A lot of times they leave after their sentencing is completed. And that work that they did and those skills are not transferable to a good job afterwards. And so Brandon, having experienced that firsthand, actually, when released, had a mentor, gave him an apprenticeship, got into firefighting and, a good union job. But he then created an organization to go back and start working with fire camps, is what they call them, to make sure that people were getting the accreditation and the skills. And so we were really excited to support that. We saw programs where people were creating, almost micro economies, if you will, right? So there's an organization that we supported in Chicago um, mostly formerly incarcerated Black women, and they had learned cooking skills.
Mhm,
And so it's now called Shy Fresh Kitchen,
mhm.
and it's a worker-owned company where they source all
I'm not sure if it's
food.
on. Great. You were paused for a sec there. We lost you when you said to work our own company, and then it froze for a second.
Oh, sorry, is this better?
Yeah, yeah, you're good now. Yeah,
Great. So, the new reality, right, of like
yeah,
being
exactly.
in conversations and it's like the when Wi-Fi fails.
Yeah. So
And
the
so
Chicago, yeah, the
yeah,
Chicago,
it's called
yeah,
Shy Fresh Kitchen, and
yeah, that sounds super
they're
interesting.
they're worker owned, and they're sourcing their food from Black farmers in Illinois,
Hmm.
and now they're providing healthy food for a lot of the school district
Hmm.
and other business, right? So like there's these other ways where workers do have this idea of like ownership,
Hmm.
creating these apprenticeship programs, and it's really exciting to have that insight. You know the 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 I guess the one of the things that like we are seeing and with the PRO Act that which you mentioned is this opportunity around gig and contract workers, right?
Hmm.
I think we all learned through the pandemic that this was a community that not only had um, not been thought of, but just completely was mostly impacted by the pandemic. And a lot of the gig and contract workers tend to be Black, Indigenous, and people of color and women, right?
Hmm.
And there was no benefits and safety net for them. And you think about the care economy, and so I do think that what what the PRO Act and us innovating around what is now 1/3 of the labor force in the U.S., right? This gig contract economy workers is that we need a lot of work to figure out,
Hmm.
the classification issues. What do benefits look like that are sort of transferable, right?
Hmm.
So many of benefits have been tied to one particular job,
Hmm.
um, and yeah, what does a quality job look like for a contracting gig worker?
Hmm.
And besides the thing that is sold, which is the flexibility, right?
Right.
Which is culturally uh, um, very favorable to people,
Yeah.
whether
Yeah.
and in some ways sort of disguises all the other benefits that people don't get.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so,
The
so
ones that.
I'd be
Yeah.
curious to hear from you, like, what does
Yeah.
quality jobs and what does it look like to engage what is now like almost 30 over 30%, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Our labor force. And so
Yeah. Yeah. This gig economy stuff is super interesting, and it's a tricky one, and we want to be as innovative as possible and get you know m- you know look for ways that things have changed. Um, at the same time, we also want to make sure that where we have examples that work, that we can do those under existing law without weakening uh, the standards. Because I think that in some instances we've seen gig companies propose. That in order to hold on to workers and to recruit workers, they want to be able to offer some benefits, but they also don't want to they're trying to avoid the the obligations that come with treating people as employees. But I think it's important to distinguish between, and social security, workers comp, etc. um, I think it's important to distinguish between what's an employee independent contractor problem and what's a gig issue. Because the gig issue, we've got models that have worked for like the gig economy. Look at construction, look at entertainment. Heavily unionized industries, where the you know people going from one job to another is a solvable thing. That you could that we've got portable benefits in the building trades. We've got portable benefits in, you know, for musicians, for screenwriters, for actors. Like those models exist. The harder, they're really, I think lots of times it's not so much a problem of the model so much as the problem of power, and how do you organize people to get there. So if you think about let's pick an example, Uber drivers, the nothing would necessarily stop people from setting up a fund to have some benefits there. Machinists have done that with the black car fund in New York. The tricky part is this sort of the independent contractor and an employee question. And I think for a lot of, this is one where there's some debate, obviously, about what the right approach is. But we tend to think, the policy positions that have been adopted by the federation's elected leadership, cautions us to be careful to preserve 100 years of hard fought and won employment benefits of because some of the things we've seen out there, that some of the bills that have been proposed by Uber and Lyft in some places would say, anyone who gets dispatched for their work via an app, they're not an employee. That pretty quickly from there you would see the Uberization of all of construction, and that sort of so there we have concerns there, and as much as there is technological innovation happening, we also want to make sure we don't confuse technological innovation, with as a justification for giving up what are pretty important rights, to workers' comp, unemployment insurance, Social Security, all of the basic benefits of that have been won by working people over the last 100 years.
No, that's absolutely right. And I think it's a good say, because I think some of the top issues that we're focusing on right now, and we're seeing where we could continue to make some investments, learn and share those learnings, are around this, there's gig work. And so I would say not only have we been sort of I just feel like in terms of organizing and understanding the community, like there hasn't been a coalesced group of people around gig workers, right? And on the other side, like our platforms and companies have the money. I mean,
Yeah, right. There's a money and power question.
yeah, you look at how efforts have been outspent,
Yeah.
in California, and so, but it's not just the money; it's that they have the culture too, right? And um, it's interesting because with innovation and sort of future conversations, like no one really wants to go up against that culture fight, right?
Yeah,
And it's,
yeah, that's
you
right.
really brought up those points about like how do we do that and still preserve things that um, you know uh, are enforceable, I would say.
Yeah, that's
Through
right. That's
policy.
right. Yeah.
And
I
yeah,
I think that culture question is really interesting. And I was having a debate with a colleague at the Federation. I'm really excited about worker ownership, and I think co-ops are super interesting. And like, I helped start a taxi co-op in my kind of spare time here in Montgomery County, for taxi drivers who especially were doing disability services that were not being done by the TNCs. So I've been like just in a personal way up front with that and seeing how hard it is, and it's challenging. But I look sometimes at other countries in the world, and all throughout Latin America, all throughout Europe, even in Canada, we have a much bigger sector of the economy are worker co-ops, and I wonder, about how America is changing, and like, are we changing in a way that more people are interested in the kind of, it's not easy, right? The thing that stops worker co-ops from developing, I think, is they're democratic institutions, right? They elect their leaders. And like you combine running a democracy with running a business, that's hard to do, right? And sometimes I think maybe like, are Canadians and Latin Americans and Europeans just better than us than that? I don't know. Are we too mixed up of a country? I don't know. But I wonder if America's changing a little bit, and I think that, you cite the high, the example you cited, the forestry one, is super cool and like really awesome. But I feel like there's certainly, if you look at like the broad social, opinion research, like there's definitely something changing in America in terms of how people think about what their obligations and connections are to each other. But like, do you think we're getting to the place where our society is going to be more open to worker ownership and these like more economic democracy, more akin to what we see in parts of the other parts of the world where that have a little bit different histories than us, but not that different. I don't know. I'm curious your take on that.
Christian, well, it's interesting. I don't know, when we say, are we ready? I'm like, it is coming across clear to us from these
Mhm.
innovations that the workers and the people who
Yeah.
have proximity workers, they're ready, right? And so it's like, who is listening and where does the worker's voice fit into the
Mhm.
conversations around the debate and stuff? And so
Mhm.
um,
Mhm.
yeah, really interesting. The other couple things that we're working on too is the whole childcare and care industry too, right?
Mhm.
Which is,
Yeah.
I think, what was spotlighted during the pandemic too, right? Which I guess fall into sort of a lot of the contract work that you're talking about. We
Mhm.
are going to continue to look into cooperatives too, just
Mhm.
because again that has been a big interest. But you mentioned the idea of like running a business and a democratic practice, and so the other priority that we're looking in is how do we create more independent revenue generation models too. And we're actually doing a case study right now, um, analyzing groups that we've supported that have this built into them so that they do become independent, they do become profitable, and
Mhm.
therefore more sustainable. The other thing, and I think this goes to, it kind of ties your point around regulations and victories that we've been able to have through government, during the pandemic, and our conversation around gig and contract workers too, right? Yes, like some of those things exist, but structurally through government, what we saw was that uh, there was no way to get unemployment insurance to contract and gig workers, right? And we had done an experiment in 2019 around emergency cash transfers.
Mhm.
It was the largest in the country. We gave $500 to mostly drivers.
Mhm.
We gave $1,000 to 500 drivers for an emergency. It was like we all started hearing in 2019 that more than half the people in this country didn't have $1,000 for an emergency. So we wanted to test what it would look like, how you would move that resource out. So we ended up doing that in 2019. That became very helpful for us in 2020 when our economy began to shut down in March.
Mhm.
We had sort of these tools and best practices for how to move emergency cash out to people, banked,
Mhm.
unbanked.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
and so what we then learned was that when we got to you know uh, providing, right, we had historic policy to provide unemployment insurance to contract workers and gig workers for the first time in US history. But you're the history person,
Mhm.
so you should correct me if
Yeah,
not.
yeah, yeah. No, I think that's right. I think that's
Is my
right.
understanding that was the
Yeah,
first time. A lot of agencies weren't really set up to
to deal with.
process
Yeah.
things. And so one of the things we're working on right now is our design sprint around unemployment insurance. And what we're doing is we built a technology that we're close to partnering with 3 states where a person who, drives during the day, maybe does TaskRabbit, delivers food, has like 5 or 6 different streams of income, will
Mhm.
now be able to use this technology, you know, have that be validated, aggregated, and produce, income verification that they could submit to
Hmm.
government.
That's
And
interesting.
so I say that as like this is one slice of an innovation around this broader social safety net that exists that you were
Mhm.
talking about earlier.
Right,
We have a
right.
lot of work to do as our economy has and our workforce has changed. I feel like we haven't really kept up with that, and the pandemic really provided opportunities for that kind of innovation. And I'm curious, like, whether you've seen other things that you think we could be working on as well.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Can you share what states you're gonna roll that out in? That's super interesting.
We're
Not
like
yet?
in,
Yeah,
we're in MOUs right
yeah,
now.
yeah. Fair enough. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
super
But it's
interesting.
interesting. They would that you they're unexpected in
Mhm.
places, and some places who have actually, you know, uh, said no to unemployment insurance, but are still willing to give this a try. And so
Yeah.
we should be
Oh,
able
that's
to launch
interesting.
this pretty soon, and we'll be doing a couple of pieces and briefings around that in the months
Yeah,
to come. So.
that's super interesting. That's super interesting. Um, yeah, in the pandemic, I would say what y- what we saw, um, the pressing need, just the sort of basic human needs were massive, and that the one of the advantages of having a labor federation, of having all the unions get together, is we've got central labor councils and state federations, literally in every community, and we have a long-standing partnership with United Way. So we sort of kicked into high gear in terms of just providing basic food relief and rent assistance and helping people access the government programs. But the LA County Federation, San Diego, I mean, gosh, around the country, we're doing like weekly food banks, just feeding you know thousands and thousands of people. So we saw that, for sure. And there's a long-standing established United Way partnership that sort of people are ready to kick into gear in those places. And that sort of institutional structure that the labor movement has, is sort of perfectly designed for this kind of thing. It's because it's everywhere. So just the sort of organizing people power, muscle is there. Um, the But then we also saw just a ton of organizing as well, especially in healthcare, and more, and these are sort of some things are just more traditional, but lots of organizing among nurses and hospitals. We saw big organizing happening in places that normally didn't. The largest hospital in Asheville, North Carolina, the only trauma one hospital in Maine that people have been trying to organize that place for 30 years. Well, they just, they did it, like it's the pandemic just sort of, drew into relief things that people already knew and saw, but just crystallized, that workers, need to get together, that if management has all of the power and authority, at the end of the day, that's not a great way to build, to build from. It's not a place to build consensus and to bring people together. That people need an independent organization that that represents their interests, that's resourced by them. That model is old, but adaptive. So
Yeah,
um,
I think it's really interesting, like in this moment, right? Because I feel like for the last couple of decades, at least in my lifetime, people have um, been seen as like a pass through for economic recovery,
mhm.
and I feel like in the last 2 years, that's sort of started to shift a bit, where we see more and more that workers and people are more and more the focus of the recovery.
That's interesting. Yeah, so you're
Right.
recovering people, not the economy as a thing that's
Exactly. And so I think our work, like, collectively, has to be about how do we solidify that frame and move the needle in centering workers, right?
yeah,
In the advocacy, in the theory, and in the policies.
yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah. So go
I'm
ahead.
reminded I'm reminded of one thing you mentioned about innovation that we saw during the pandemic. One of the things we saw too was we developed a new mobile enabled data tool called Action Builder, which is it's a mobile enabled database for organizing. Basically does in the political world, there have been these, the data tools are pretty are pretty sophisticated already, but there are some unique challenges that exist when you're trying to organize workers into a union or into a worker center or that kind of thing. So we've developed this tool of Action Builder, which is highly flexible, mobile ready, and that was quickly turned from organizing campaigns into a mutual aid use. So we saw workers, in the same way that workers organize themselves to form unions, we saw people using Action Builder, and we encouraged use of Action Builder for mutual aid projects as well, and saw a good number of those across the country.
Yeah, that's amazing. Like, I think the tools that we have to provide have to help workers. Um, they need to be as innovative and dynamic as the technologies that are disrupting and right, like sort of defining our lives.
Hmm.
And I think that that's cool that you're doing that. And I know like we're probably gonna have to wrap up our conversation
Yeah.
soon. But I think for me, like my takeaway, in our conversation is like we do need more participatory action, right? That is like worker
Mhm.
centered and led. We need to put more trust in workers and worker leaders to do the work and treat them as the experts in some of the policy solutions, which I'm still not seeing a whole lot as we're talking about innovation and like recovery um and yeah, so and then that vein, like making more room for innovation and experimentation and doing
Mhm.
so at the state, federal, and the city level. And people should really like check out the New Jersey Future of Work. We're partnering with them to do a round of innovation where we're giving money to ideas in New Jersey. And I think really those partnerships between the private, public, and philanthropy are exactly what the innovation should be. And so it's been really great talking to you today, Christian. And
Absolutely, Eddie. It was lovely to catch up, and I feel like there's a lot more to come in this space, and we're going to be launching some things in the next few months with some philanthropic partners that we're excited about. So more to come on this front as well from our side as well.
well,
So
hey, well, let's keep this conversation
yeah, let's
going post Horizons. And
that sounds good.
I'm glad that we were able to cover a lot of stuff, like the innovations, what we're seeing in the worker space, the way that the pandemic has impacted workers in our communities, some of the innovations and what people can actually do. And I really hope people will visit the Lift Fund and the Workers Lab. We have a whole section called our Learning Hub, where we are publishing a lot of what we're learning in these ideas. And I'm sure the Lift Fund has that as well. And so thank you so much.
Yes, thanks so much, Eddie. Great to see you,
Good to
and
see you too.
all right, hope to see you in person soon.
Oh, yes, may that be the case.